My woodworking journey began simply. Outdoors with a circular saw, a drill, and a driver. It was a dream come true, and my lovely wife suggested that I move into our backyard shed. Yeah, this shed. What once was called a micro shop. It was cozy, if cold in the winter. I made it my sanctuary and packed it full of tools. I actually made a surprising number of cool projects in it. But I was beginning to outgrow it. It was time, the money was in the bank, so we began building the garage. I've got 5 separate videos on all the groundwork, framing, roofing, and siding of the garage, so I'll link those in the description. Suffice it to say, it was a lot of work. But the question is, was it worth it? And was I able to build this $65,000 garage for my budget of 25,000 Canadian dollars? Stick around to the end where I will break down all my thoughts and the results of the entire build. I'm realizing that I never gave any dimensions for this workshop in any of my previous videos, so let's remedy that. This is a 24-foot by 24.5-foot garage with 10-foot ceilings that will ensure I can flip a full sheet of plywood end for end without hitting anything. The garage door is a 16 by 8 insulated door from Steelcraft, and my 2 by 6 24-inch on center framing was designed to maximize R value for our cold Alberta winters. And I think that about catches us up, so let's jump into me putting in the electrical boxes. Along this back wall here, most of my electrical boxes are set up high to be over top of my miter station. Everything else is at a height, I believe, of 24 inches from the ground. Let me show you really quickly how I've run all of my wiring. Over here by the electrical panel, I have everything labeled with what it is. So I've got these wires here, that one there, and then I've got all these that have kind of fallen down. You'll see I've run all of my 20 amp stuff, and then I've also got my 30 amp going right there. On this wall in 120, I have 2 different circuits in 20 amp. So I've got 20 amp 1 and 2 there, and then I have 20 amp 1 and 2 here. And then I've got 2 different 240 volt circuits on this side, a 15 amp circuit that runs over in this corner here. All of my 15 amp outlets, including the garage door, are running off of that one circuit there. So this one here, you'll see, runs up here along my joists and out to where the garage door is going to be there. The other breaker is just going to internal and external lighting. We see I've got it labeled here. We've got exterior lights, my power, and my interior lights. So the interior lights are running up to these 2 junction boxes here, where I will have 15 amp plugs. All of my lighting is daisy chainable 110, and it all plugs in. There's no hard wiring for the lights that I'm using. On this wall, I have 2 different 120 volt, 20 amp circuits. So I've got my number 3 circuit here. This one here is actually going to be a double circuit, 3 and 4. And so what this one is going to be for is my IVAC system for the miter saw. So the miter saw will be plugged into 3, shop vac will be plugged into 4. And then here again is my number 4. My air compressor is going to be sitting here underneath the bench. That's why this one's lower. You can see 120 amp, the 3rd circuit. But here is my second 220 20 amp. So this is going to be for my bandsaw. And then I've got my number 3 120 20 and my number 4 120 20, and then that same number 2 220 20 amp breaker here for a jointer or some sort of bigger tool that may need that kind of power. Over again, why people shouldn't just grab their biggest screwdriver to wind a spring.
Well, there's a couple of reasons. Number 1, with the shaped end like this, you put it in there and you're barely in past the rounded area, so it wants to slip easy, as well as the fact because you're at an angle like this, you're putting all your pressure on the one point up top here instead of spreading it through the whole thing. So what ends up happening is this part breaks because all the pressure's there, and then all the load on this spring suddenly comes unwound, and it can cause all sorts of problems, like it can cause the shaft to pop out and fall on you. If you happen to be too close to this thing, it'll actually rip your hands off, and yeah, it's just not a good way to do things. You should have a proper size bar.
And so generally speaking, if you don't have someone that can guide you through the process, you should just call a professional for this part.
You always say that because there's always legal aspect to it as well. That's fair.
What I'm currently working on is insulating with some of these styrofoam panels, just filling in some of the areas that you really can't put the bats. The reason I went with these here is just so that I could get a consistent vapor barrier with the recessed panel. And then I've got to cut one for up here. I've already done the ones for around the window. I'm going to need to do some for above the garage door there on the header beam. Finally, I'm hoping to have enough left over so that when I do my attic access later on, I can throw a little bit of insulation down there. All right, let's throw on some coveralls and finish this thing. These insulation bats that are going into the garage walls are something like R22 or R24. They'll definitely get you itchy, uncomfortable, and coughing though if you don't wear proper protection during installation, which is why I was so willing to wear this sauna suit. One thing I learned, however, these cheap paint suits let a lot of the insulation fibers through, so I'm not actually sure all the sweating was worth it. The vapor barrier went up pretty simply. It was definitely awkward though, especially on the ceiling. I did use this special acoustic sealant anywhere that the vapor barrier terminated, along the bottom of all of the studs, the top of all the studs, along window frames and all of that, to make sure that there was nowhere for air to get through. I ended up with some wrinkles, which I hope won't be a problem. Let me know if they will be, though it's kind of too late now. Off camera, I taped all my vapor barrier seams before turning the camera back on to start my first attempt at installing the OSB panels on the ceiling, which didn't go so well, so I quickly decided I was going to start on the walls instead. All the tools that I use in this project, as always, will be linked in the description. That includes my Makita track saw, this DeWalt oscillating saw. So if you want something that you see, you think it's a good idea, don't worry, head down there after you watch this video, and you can support this channel by using my affiliate links to Amazon. Well, this is what I've gotten so far. For the time being, I've given up on the roof. I'm gonna see if I can get some help. Otherwise, I'm going to look into a drywall lift. The guys that are working in the garage next to me, they said that it's possible I could borrow the one that they've got on site over the weekend, so we'll see what happens there. So what I've got to do now, I just finished slicing down this board here to fit in this area, and now I've got to transfer my markings for the window and for my power and my switches, and then that'll go in. All right, so as you can see, I've started work up along the top here. We're making progress. I mentioned it in one of my previous videos, but I am so glad in preparation for this build that I invested in the Makita track saw. It has been such a game changer for doing quick, straight cuts. This here is my final attempt at putting OSB on the ceiling without a proper drywall lift. I actually managed to get this one in place, but it was such a struggle, so exhausting, and frankly so scary that immediately following getting this up on the wall, I got off the ladder and I phoned the people next door and I got one of these. This here is not my first attempt at using this. This is actually my second attempt. To see my first attempt, which failed miserably, stick around to the end of the video and watch the blooper that I have at the end. It was quite the catastrophe. I've got to say, this drywall lift is an absolute game changer when it comes to affixing sheet goods on the ceiling. Even if I'd had to pay for this one, I managed to borrow this one, but even paying for it, it would have absolutely been worth it, saving hours, the safety aspect, everything. If you're doing this, just go out and get one of these machines. You will not regret it. I'm serious. Absolute 100% game changer. For some reason in my brain it made sense to put my trim up before painting. I don't know why though. I actually ended up with color getting on the trim in the places where I did color. I just wouldn't do it that way in the future, but hey, you know, live and learn, right? These may be the absolute worst mitered corners that I've ever done, but hey, that's what filler's for, right? It's just a garage. I have everything moved into kind of the center against the garage door. Garage door is plasticed off, so is the breaker box, the window, all of my outlets, including the ones on the ceiling. So with that, we're gonna set up the plastic across the floor to keep everything clean, and then I'll bring in the sprayer and we'll go from there. Next. Good boy. Sit. Oh, good boy. With everything covered in plastic that I don't want painted, it's time for me to use my Wagner high efficiency airless. It's a Control Pro 130. I'll have a link in the description. We're just gonna fill this thing up, prime it, and start putting our primer sealing on the ceiling and all of the walls. Let's go. I had this shaken up yesterday afternoon, so it should be ready to go. Go ahead and prime this thing. I've got it set to prime. We'll turn it on. All right, I just got back from the store. I had to pick up some more of this sealer. As you can see, I didn't quite get where I needed to be. Just one thing to keep in mind is when you're spraying, especially in the ceilings there, a lot of it's falling down. You're not getting the coverage that it says on the can. That's not completely true. You're not getting the top end of the coverage that it says on the can. All right, this here is what I am using to paint the majority of the room. Satin interior, and this is latex paint. With the painting going really smoothly, I moved on to installing some of this rubber or vinyl trim. Went on pretty easily, just a little bit of silicone to hold it in place and some finish nails. All right, we're on to the insulation blowing stage of everything. But before we start blowing the insulation in, we've got to install some of these foam attic ventilation channels. And so I'm gonna head right up into the attic access that I created and throw on a headlamp, and I'll go ahead and show you how I'm gonna do those. Okay. This rental machine that we got, which came free with the insulation, it was a little bit of a nightmare. There were many times that it would essentially blow nothing but air until the boys down below managed to shove things in enough for it to actually garble up. Eventually they actually started taking handfuls and just sticking it in there, but we were blowing in R50. I think that was about 19 inches of blow-in insulation. So they were hard at work down below. I was hard at work sweating and feeling like I could hardly breathe, even through my mask up top. But overall, everything was working out really well. They did a great job with their cameras as well. So not a whole lot to complain about here, except for how slowly everything went. And, well, maybe that explains why things weren't working so well. Apparently they had a dance party while I was up there blowing in the insulation. Whatever works, guys, but there we are. We're done, and insulation is in. Wow, what a journey these past few months. A full shop tour will be forthcoming at some point, and in that video, I'll give some of the details surrounding the new tools that you're seeing right now. And in case you're wondering, they've all been Facebook Marketplace finds. I've gotten great deals. This space has been absolutely amazing to work in, and as you can see, I have a new workbench and outfeed table that are covered in projects right now, but I will have build videos coming out for those soon too. Any questions that you have about this build, please drop them in the comments. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Let's talk final costs here for a second. At the end of the last video, we were up to 19,453 Canadian dollars, and I've done the math on the rest of my project, so let me break it down for you before we see the final total, and then I'll put up that blooper that I promised you earlier. The insulation bats ran me about $811. Now, I was fortunate enough to have some blow-in insulation that I bought a few years ago for our house that never got used, so I repurposed them for the garage. The vapor barrier was $75, and the wire outlet boxes and outlets ran me $1,450. I was also fortunate to have the service wire sub-panel, breakers, as well as the backfilling of the garage foundation and the trenches gifted to me, so those would be an additional expense if you were doing everything yourself. My gas install didn't make it into the videos, but this 50,000 BTU heater ended up costing me about $900, and the gas install, permit, and hookup cost was $2,000. The overhead door was another Facebook Marketplace find for $1,000, and then I spent about $400 on paint for this project. So all in all, that brings the total of this garage cost to 26,589 Canadian dollars, which is just over budget, but compared to the $65,000 quotes others are getting for similar spaces and the $45,000 bump in property value, I think it pays for itself. All right, enough talking. Stick around for the blooper, and until next time, make sawdust, not excuses.